Code is Craft. This is our semi-monthly speaker series. I know some of you were here last month for Steve Klabnik. Tonight we are excited to welcome John Resig, the creator of jQuery and Dean of Computer Science at Khan Academy. Before we do that, a few logistics. Bathroom, take a right and a left, and it's on your right. Snacks and drinks over there. And also welcome to those who are joining us on the live stream. We tend to live stream these at livestream.com/@CodeIsCraft. Also, if you want to know more about Code is Craft, Twitter account, Code is Craft. And there's also a mailing list, codeiscraft.com. So, learn all about that. But now onto the show. Thank you very much. Welcome, John Resig.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you to Etsy for giving me this opportunity. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my passion project. This has been over the last, maybe 3 or 4 years now. I've been working on this stuff. And this has been my hobby. And I've liked being able to combine sort of my side passions with my coding and have it all kind of come together. So this is, I want to talk a little bit about this. And if you'll bear with me, I want to start with a brief introduction, a brief little art history lesson, if you will. So the form of Japanese art that I'm really into, and it was just completely incidental. I've discovered it online, just found some amazing woodblock prints. This is probably the most famous woodblock print that you might recognize, Hokusai's Great Wave. It's on coffee mugs and everything. It's all around the world. But this is coming from a period of time in Japan from about late 1600s to late 1800s. And during this time, Japan is completely at peace. So there was a whole bunch before this, hundreds of years of war. And suddenly Japan is very peaceful, and as a result becomes very, very prosperous. People don't have to fight anymore, they don't have to kill each other anymore, and what happens is that people make a lot of money. And when you start making a lot of money, at the time there was sort of this class structure in place. There were like the samurai at the top, and there was everyone else down below. And what you have is sort of this blending of the class structure where people who used to be poor are now very rich, and the samurais who used to be very rich are actually now kind of poor. But what happens is that you have all these very interesting changes in art, and that's what is very exciting for me. So this is actually a map of Tokyo, I think circa 1850s or so. So in this art form, you have a number of different themes. And the thing that's interesting about this for me is that, generally speaking, this is what's called woodblock printing. So these are prints, these are pieces of paper. And the way it happens is some artist does a design, and that design is passed off to a carver, who then takes that design and carves it physically into a block of wood. That block of wood, there's ink put on top, and then that ink is put onto the piece of paper. And you use this, and then if you want to do something complicated like this with multiple different colors, you have to have multiple different wood blocks. So it can be a very complicated process, and it requires a lot of funding, and there's a whole interesting dynamic around this. But as a result, because of this, prints were very, very cheap to produce, and there were lots of them produced. And what ends up happening is you have subject matter that is very, let's say, populist in nature. It's the sort of things that the common people wanted to see. And so, like, for example, this particular print, this is a depiction of a waitress at a tea shop. And the reason why this particular lady is being depicted is because she was supposed to be incredibly beautiful. And so during this time, you have, I don't know what a good analogy is. I think probably the best analogy is that woodblock prints are sort of like the People magazine / Maxim / something like that of the age. All right, it's not highbrow. At least some of them are, not all of them. And so relatively speaking, this art form is comparatively relatively new in Japan, but also in scholarship. A lot of people haven't appreciated this art form until recently. So you have just like lots of really interesting depictions. You end up, again, this one here is actually a procession, in this case of courtesans marching through Japan. And then the other piece of subject matter that's super, super popular are Kabuki actors. And again, it's hard to draw a parallel back to modern day, but Kabuki actors during the day, going to a Kabuki play was like a big thing. You would go early in the day, you would go and eat lunch at your seat, you'd be talking with other people, it was a long affair, it was like a lot of fun. And it was a lot more, let's say, raucous than a typical theater event. There would be lots of shouting, and people would have fan clubs, and when their favorite actor would come up, you'd be like, throw banners around. It's more like a sporting event / theater event. But as a result, people really loved these actors. And so like, this is a depiction of a Kabuki actor here, as is this one. And so people would buy these as souvenirs to be able to remember their favorite actors. Now, you have all these depictions happening, and I love sort of the visual design that happens. And one of the other big ones is depictions of warriors. So again, a lot of this is coming from sort of the old samurai culture in Japan, and you like having these old stories. In this case, an old Chinese story. Fantastic. I love this depiction of this tattoo on his stomach. If you ever see tattoos like the tattoos, the full body tattoos like the Yakuza have and stuff like that, that comes from Japanese prints. They cribbed them off of Japanese artists who were then cribbing it off of other artists. But you have these really amazing designs. Of course, you have things like sumo wrestling as well that existed during that time frame. And of course, incredible nature prints. So you have like the Great Wave, which is very common. And then you have fish. And then and there's a lot of really weird stuff, which I want to get into. So I want to close out the list with these just to get you excited, because I think it's a really interesting and fascinating art form. One of the things I love about it is that I've been studying this and learning about it for many years now, and I realize I'm never going to stop learning anything. I like problems that can't be solved, and this is definitely one. Like, no matter how much I learn, I will never finish. So this here, as you can see, are cats. There are a number of cats. But they all have very distinctive faces. They don't look very cat-like. And those faces are actually the faces of Kabuki actors. Now, the reason why this was done in the early 1840s, is because there was censorship happening at that time. And at the time, the government was cracking down, and they actually made it illegal to depict Kabuki actors in prints. So one way around it is you make a print that's like, hey, these are some awesome cats dressed in kimonos, and they just so happen to look a lot like your favorite Kabuki actors. So you could do this, you could hide it, and this actually became very, very popular, like a way to sort of subvert the government, subvert the censorship, but also, it made it for a fun game for the viewer to be like, oh, that looks like that, that one actor, that looks like him, and so like, it's interesting. Even after the censorship ended, they ended up continuing to make prints like this, simply because people liked it. This is another one. So this is you have a face here. I just want to zoom in a little bit. So here, this face, you can see it's actually made up of people. So there's like individual bodies here making up the different parts of the face, which is weird. I'll grant you that. And up here in the top, you have, it's actually a catfish. So it's a catfish floating, shooting lasers at this head body pile. All right. So this is, it's really weird. You have to like unpack what's happening here. So one of the things that was illegal to depict in prints was actually any current events. Current events, you could not talk about what was happening, especially when bad things happened. That had to be kept under wraps. This is actually a depiction of an earthquake. So this was printed after the fact. And what you have here are the bodies of the people who died. And below on his cloak are all the sort of building supplies. You see planks of wood and brooms and all sorts of things. Or not brooms, but poles and rope. And the reason why there's a catfish is that the catfish was considered to be sort of the entity that caused earthquakes. When it sort of writhed around, like earthquakes would happen. And if I understand correctly, this was even something that happened recently. Like they would still like look at, there's in Japan, they would still be studying catfish to see like what was, it was really weird. Anyway, it's part of their culture. And so again, like I love the fact that there's like so much to unpack here. So one of my interests as well is, I love these prints. I love this art form. I think it's so interesting. And I personally, I would love to own a print, okay? So this becomes a problem because prints are typically really expensive. And sometimes when prints come up at auction, so for example, these prints here came up at auction. And in this particular lot, this is what the description said. It just said lot 50, lot 55, 20 Japanese woodblock prints, each depicting a female/geisha figure with calligraphy throughout each print. They have no idea what this is. There's this complete ballpark. They're looking at it like, yeah, it's Japanese-ish, whatever. And they're like, $400 to $600. Like, this is what auction, this is actually really, really common. If you're not a big auction house who has like a staff who can like actually identify things, they'll just punt completely on identification and just be like, meh, people will figure it out. And so the problem is, though, is that if I or anyone else wants to come along and be like, how do I understand what's on this print and understand that this is a real print and something I want to get, it's really hard. Because what you have to do is, step one, acquire and read lots and lots of really expensive books. This is something I've been doing myself personally because a lot of this information that I need to learn is not available online. This is something that bothers me personally. But so you end up having to get these giant tomes that are multiple hundreds of dollars, and then like it's frustrating. And additionally, you have to learn to read Japanese, which is obviously it's not an easy language to learn. However, you have to learn to read Japanese from the 17th and 19th century. This is very, very hard to do. Very few experts can do it. This is the sort of thing that only like the top curators at the top museums can do. And so this is something that you're not going to learn from Rosetta Stone, all right? And so it's a little bit frustrating for me because like, okay, I would like to be able to read and speak Japanese. That'd be fun. But like, I don't really actually care that much about conversational Japanese. I care more about a form of Japanese that no one actually speaks or writes anymore, which is whatever. So on top of this, though, you need to learn to read Japanese calligraphy. And that's a whole other thing unto itself. So as a solution, I've been building tools to sort of route around these problems that I consider to be rather insurmountable. But unless you use technology to completely skip them. So I built this website called ukiyo-e.org. So ukiyo-e means pictures of the floating world. It's the term commonly used for Japanese woodblock printing. And so I built this website, and what I've done is I've aggregated pictures and information about Japanese woodblock prints from many, many museums, universities, dealers, auction houses, all into a single database. I currently have almost 250,000 images of prints in this one site. And I have it indexed, so if you want, you can search for cat and find all the pictures about cats, at least all the ones that are in English about cats. We'll get to that in a second. And additionally, I've done the best that I can to localize this and translate it into both English and Japanese. So someone who is visiting the website in Japan, they will see a completely Japanese version of the website, and someone who's visiting the English form of the site will see it all in English. So this is involved actually translating the Japanese databases to English and English Japanese to English databases into Japanese, which is really, really challenging. So to do this, as I go through the talk here, I'm going to mention a whole bunch of different modules and things I've written and that might be of use to you. Most of them probably will not, unless you really care about like Japanese names and stuff like that. But I just want to point them out so that you can use them if you want. So this is one module I wrote called I-18N Internationalization Node module. So this is one that you can use to do easy, relatively easy internationalization of strings. So this is a case where you can have like a string and map it to the same string in a different language. And it makes it really easy for translators to handle this. So this is what I use to manage the translations on the website itself. Actually, right now, there aren't that many strings on the website, so it's pretty easy to do this kind of manually using just like, partially using Google Translate, but partially also, like there are a lot of cases where I would be like, oh, there's this one string, like there was a string I wanted like for example, I wanted to have a button that says search, for example. Well, I know a website that has a search button, Google. So I go to Google, and then I go to the Japanese version of Google. I'm like, well, there's the search button text, and I copy it over. And like, so there we go. I can just copy all the internationalization that other people have already done. That works for some things, not everything. So a little bit about the architecture. I have the website core itself hosted on DigitalOcean. At the moment, I'm using sort of a front layer Nginx put into Node using the Express framework. I'm storing the data using MongoDB, and I'm using Elasticsearch for the full text indexing. Now, one of the big things is that I wanted the website to be really, really fast, because a lot of the users of the website are actually very international. And what's interesting is that what's happened as the site has grown is that currently the United States is actually the third largest market. It goes Japan, then Europe, then the US. And that's been just completely, it's been very interesting to watch that happen. So, but one of the things I really care about is, in this case, I have lots of images I want to load up really fast, so I want to host them all on a CDN. And if you're not familiar with what a CDN is, that's when you have a lot of servers essentially all around the globe, all with the same exact content, in this case, the images of the prints. And so then that way, when you request a print, for example, if you're in Japan, you request a print, you will get it from a server in Japan, as opposed to going to a server in the United States and then back again. That takes way too long. So another thing that I worked on with the site here was this feature, where, let me see if we can start the, don't know how to trigger the animation. Oh, there we go. So you see here, like you can move the mouse cursor back and forth over an artist. I will show this a couple times here. So then that way, what you can do, because one of the things I really wanted, was the ability to, when you see an artist, it's really hard to kind of get a sense for the entire breadth of their work. You can look at a page with like 100 images or something, but it's much easier to just kind of flip through them, like you're leafing through a book. So I created this little animation. So if you mouse over an artist, it loads all the images in the background, and then you can kind of scrub through a whole bunch of prints simultaneously. So this is actually on the homepage right now, and I released it as a jQuery plugin, so you can use that as on your own website if you want. So one of the big problems that I encounter is collecting all of this data. So this is actually a really, really challenging problem. And I've looked at a number of other frameworks out there, like scraping frameworks for going and scraping data from websites. There are some good ones. However, there are very few out there, I should say there are none that I've seen, that are capable of scraping the absolutely insane websites I've encountered, made by different institutions, I assume in the mid-90s, using the most antiquated stuff I've ever seen. It's really, really bad. I'll give some anecdotes. There was one institution, I won't name any names, just because I feel bad. But there was one institution where you go to the search page to search for some prints or something. It's a museum. And you get there, and you go to and you see the search box, and then down below it says, do you wish to resume your search for something? And you're like, well, that's weird. I haven't done any searches. And you're like, what's it doing? And then so you do a search, and then you come back later, and you go back to the home page, and it says, do you wish to resume your search for your thing? And what you just realize is that there is only one session for everyone on the website. They're all sharing the same state, and you can pick up someone else's search that they were doing earlier on who knows what. Stuff like this happens a lot. It's really crazy. Yeah, I mean, at this point, if a website is nothing but tables all the way down, like I'm like, whatever, there's another one, I'll get the data. Like it doesn't even faze me anymore. I'm just happy that the page just load. I'll take that. So I built this scraping framework. And because one of the things I really wanted to do was sort of have this flow where typically what you're going to end up doing when you're scraping a site, or at least a museum site or something like that, is you're going to go to a search page. And if you're going to do this like a human, you would go to a search result page. You would click one of the results, go to that page, copy all the information out of it, download the image, and then go back. Hit the back button, go to the search page, click the next link, and keep going through. So this is exactly what I did. I built a scraping framework that completely mimics this. And I did it using Phantom.js. So Phantom.js allows you to essentially have a headless WebKit. So what that means is that you can't see the browser, but you can have it running in the background, and you can control it programmatically. So you can be like, click this button, click that link, hit the back button, and like do that stuff, like you're behaving like a real browser. So this is something that works really well, because you can run all the JavaScript on the page and work around all that crazy shenanigans. So what's happening here is that the bot's going through, clicking a page, and it downloads the HTML and the images and saves them for processing. So then it goes into this huge queue. All right, so this has been really complicated. I've been working on this specific thing for like a year now. And what's going to end up happening is you go to a website, you go through this whole Phantom.js queue of where you're clicking and navigating and going around. All the data is coming out of it. I dump it out into a MongoDB log and a bunch of XML files. And the reason why I do that is I take the HTML files from the web page, tidy them, convert them to XML, because typically you can find better and faster XML processors than you can find HTML processors. So just a little thing. I take that, process the data, put it into MongoDB at the end. And what I end up doing then is starting to correct the information that the institutions provide. So translating things to a different language, correcting artists, correcting dates, stuff like that. That's a whole thing unto itself. And after all of that, I'm able to finally add it to the website. Just to kind of give you an example, this is a scraper script for my particular framework that it actually, this is one that scrapes my own website. I did that just a proof of concept. That's why I used the test. I'm like, is this actually working as I would expect it to? So here, it's able to, again, go through the search pages and then extract all the data from those pages. And I like this. I like how simple it is to write. I mean, this is only like 7 lines of meaningful code, and I'm able to scrape an entire website. So as a result, it's really easy for me to add new sources in. So one of the things here, I want to show you, like, this is sort of like the data that would come out of a page. There is potentially a lot of information. In this case, I was scraping a page about an artist. So I was actually extracting the artist's bio out of the page. And you have like the name of the artist and all these other details. So tentatively, I'm calling this, I'm terrible at names. You will see this repeated throughout the talk. I have no originality when it comes to names. So I'm calling this Stack Scraper for now. Hopefully I'll think of a better one. And so you can check that out. There's really no docs yet, but if it's something that is interesting to you, let me know, and I'll start like actually documenting it more and getting it up there, because I think this has the potential to be really interesting. And then if you're interested in the actual scrapers I've written, for some reason, they're all up on GitHub as well. So the big thing, one of the big things I wanted to do with this site is going back to that original point that I mentioned, is that you're looking at a woodblock print. And in my case, if I can't read what's written there, I can't figure out a lot about it. I don't know who the artist is. I don't know all these other details. And it's really hard to learn more. So this is a case where this is quite a few years ago now. I was thinking, like, I know there are computer vision algorithms out there that can do this sort of stuff. And I'm like, well, maybe this could work for prints. Like, you could look at a print and find one that is similar to it, visually similar, and you could start to be able to learn more about it that way. So I ended up using this one service called Match Engine, provided by TinEye, and I went through every conceivable open source computer vision image similarity service I could find. A lot of them are not very good. So this is actually a commercial service, but it's extremely good. So I've been very content with it. So one of the things, I've written a Node module for it as well. So if you're going to use Match Engine, you can use that. So one of the things that you can do is this. So you can find a print, in this case, and see the same print at every other institution. Because the thing is that since it's a print, there are multiples of them. There are multiple impressions, and likely many of them have still survive, and hopefully have been digitized. And so in this case, you have prints here from Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, Minnesota, British Museum, Tokyo National Museum, Library of Congress. Like, these are all different places around the world. So this is really, really kind of amazing. So the thing is that when I made this, I was like, yay, this is really useful for me. Like, I like being able to see all these different versions of the prints. But as it turns out, this is a major thing for art researchers and scholars. Because normally what they would have to do, and which is what I was doing, is that if I wanted to see different copies of this print and understand how they looked, I would have to go to each individual website, search through it, hope to find it. And the thing is that many of these websites, for example, are in Japanese. And additionally, there is no guarantee that they're all going to agree on the artist or the title of the print. Oftentimes the prints didn't have a consistent title, so they would just be like, oh, this is a waterfall print. And you're like, well, that's not helpful, because the thing is that what you end up doing then is you end up going to the Museum of Fine Arts, for example, and searching for waterfall, and you're like, oh, only 1,000 images to dig through, and it's one of those problems that's really, really frustrating. And so I wanted to make it a lot easier. What I like is that it's even able to do stuff like this. So in this case, you have the nice cleanly cut image, but it's even able to match things like this. We have little color bars in them and black and white, so it's able to be very flexible. Show you a little bit more of an extreme example. So this is a case where you have a diptych, so a 2-panel print, and you have it up there, and there's another copy of it down there at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And what actually, if you note, they actually flipped it. They put it in the wrong order. They put it backwards, and there it is in the right order at the Met. And it was able even to handle that case. It was even able to find individual sheets of that print and handle cases where the color is not so good. So just very briefly, at a very, very high level, I want to talk a little bit about how the image matching works. So this sort of detection usually works in that you're looking for particular features in an image. So what's happening is that usually what happens is that there's a built-in algorithm for looking for interesting points. Again, this is going to be a very high level here. So in this case, these are a whole bunch of sunflowers. It found a ton of interesting points throughout. Different petals, different edges, and things that are relatively interesting and unique. And what happens is that it takes those interesting features and tries to reduce them down to a single vector. So what happens here is you have an image and you have these interesting points reduced down into a single numerical point. What you can do then is we extract all those little numerical points, and essentially there's a term for this called bag of words, which means that you have a giant pile of all these vectors. And what happens, so what you're going to say is that when you do the matching, like within the search engine, is that you then say, okay, well, image A has this vector, this vector, this vector. Image B has these different ones. Image C has these vectors that match. And you can say that at a certain point, if there are enough of these that match each other, then the images are probably similar to each other. So this is a technique that works really well, as it turns out, and is able to scale really well. You know, like Google image search and stuff like that. This is what they're doing. They're extracting all these vectors from the images, dumping them into, and in Google's case, I assume a positively massive database, and it can be very fast. Another cool part about this is that you can end up, because they're able to detect the things that are matching each other in the image, you can actually line the images up with each other. So for example here, these are two different images, two different prints, and you can line them up. In this case, on the website, I'm using a canvas element to do the matrix transformation to line them up. So you can actually flip back and forth and actually see, compare them directly. Now this is actually immensely useful to scholars, because the thing is that with the prints, they were printed on wood blocks, and the wood blocks were wood. And one thing that happens to the wood is that it's fragile. It chips and dents and changes over time. So one of the things you can see is that when you're comparing impressions like that, you can then see slight differences. It's like, you remember like I Spy and stuff like that, where you're trying to find the things that are different in one image from another. It's like that, but on like the art research level. This is like people actually do for like their real jobs. There's like a whole thing. But this is like, now it just makes it very, very easy. Now the big thing that I wanted out of this was the ability to do what's image similarity search. And so I added this to the website here. So for example, you can upload an image. So you can take out your smartphone, for example. You can take a picture of a print, and it'll find that print in all the different institutions that it exists in. So this is the thing that I was working for. Because I wanted this, because now that meant that I did not have to learn how to read Japanese calligraphy. I did not have to learn how to read 16th century Japanese, and I could just take a picture and I could be done with it, relatively speaking. Of course, if I actually do want to read what's on the print, then I do need to learn those things or find a book that will tell me what's in them. But this is, it's a major, major shortcut. What's interesting, so again, like this is something that I made for myself because I thought it'd be useful, but it ended up being immensely useful to scholars and dealers and people at museums and stuff like that. And every single time now, it's a little weird because I should say in the Japanese art world, having made jQuery doesn't go very far. They don't know what that is or what it does or how it's relevant to anything. However, I've just recently started to become recognized because of the website. They'll be like, you're the guy that made the ukiyo-e.org. And I'm like, yes, yeah, that's me. Because the thing is, now their jobs have gone from multiple days of hunting and trying to find another copy of this print to just taking a picture, and now they're done. And so it's been really fun. It's not perfect, this particular technique. I just want to show one edge case here. So this is a print in the Tokyo National Museum. You see there's huge color bars here, sort of the gradient bar and the color bar. And it matches some of the same prints, but then it also matches another print, which is a different print, but also has those color bars. So that was actually a mistake. At that point, it's matching the color bars, not the print itself. So one of the things I did, because this annoyed me, is that I wrote a mobile app. And in this particular case, I wrote a mobile app which is designed for cropping images. So what you, in this case, what you do is you load it up on your phone. It gives you a whole bunch of images to crop. You do a little selection around it. You hit done, and it crops out the image. I did it as a mobile app, and I also made it work offline. Because the thing is that it really bothered me that I was spending a lot of time in the subway, going all around town, and I wasn't being productive. So now I can sit in the subway, and I can crop images, which will then feed back into the database. And it's working really, really well. So I've already finished the first batch of just cropping all the color bars off of images. So I'm now working on a new project, which is capturing all the heads. You can see every single head you can see in a print. Because I think there's really interesting analysis that can be done with that. And maybe, I don't know what exactly can be done with it, but you could end up building like some sort of like, I don't know, like Facebook for like the 1820s in Japan. So I think that'll be kind of cool. Again, like probably for to a very specific segment of the audience, but I don't know, we'll see. So one of the things I'm really interested in is finding ways of not just making it easier to find prints, but are there genuine ways in which we can start to improve the study of Japanese woodblock printing and help understand the medium better? And there are. And what's interesting is that with this image analysis, you can end up with some really interesting cases. So this is a case here where I just want to show really quickly. We have a print, and I just want to toggle back and forth here real quick. So again, this is like one of those I Spy. So like, what can you, can someone tell me what you see is different? Besides the color, obviously. But the what? The patterns, the symbol. And the what? The chin looks different. Yes. So all those things are correct. Symbols are different. Patterns are different. And the face is different. Now, this is a Kabuki actor. It's a man portraying a woman. In Kabuki, only men were allowed to be Kabuki actors. And what ends up happening here is this is a particular role in a play. Someone was, I assume, the mother with some baby, or I don't know the exact role. However, what happened at a certain point is that a different actor was playing that role. Well, they're like, well, we got a new actor now. We have to make a whole new woodblock print. That's that's really hard. But what can we do? It's a woodblock, so we can physically take a chisel to it, chop out the old head and patterns and stuff, put in a new physically carve in a new head, and voila, you just saved a whole lot of time and effort. You don't have to do it again, and you have a whole new woodblock print. Additionally, you end up with interesting cases like this. So this is another one where, again, flipping back and forth, this one, you can see only the head changed. The hairstyle is different. The colors are a little bit different as well. But again, so that's another case where they chopped out a head. But another interesting thing here is like looking at, so this is the signature of the artist. Flipping back and forth, you see the signatures are actually different. Now this is an interesting case. So this is, as far as I know, the only case I know to exist of not only the actor being depicted in the print being changed, but also the artist who drew it being changed. And again, this will get into sort of the dynamics of production of Japanese woodblock prints. The artists themselves did not produce the prints, a publisher did. And a publisher controlled the copyright by owning the physical woodblocks. So like they could have been like, that artist is old and passé, chop, chop, chop. Let's put a new artist in. Who knows? Like there's like really interesting things to learn about this. But the thing is that the only reason why this happened is because of another tool that I made. So I built this tool for the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I've been working with them on their print collection. And one of the things I did was I went through every single print in their collection and looked for cases where their collection said one thing and another collection somewhere else in the world said a different thing. So in this case, they had a print here that was attributed to unknown. They didn't know who made it. And if you look at it, there's actually no signature on it. So they would have had a hard time determining who it was. However, you can see the same print in 3 other institutions, and they all attribute it to Kuniyoshi. So this is a case now where the Met can be like, oh, well, that's obvious. Everyone else now says that this is Kuniyoshi. And they can fix their the data in their collection and have it just be a much better catalog. So this is the sort of thing that I'm really interested in, is finding ways of doing this. Now, the previous case I mentioned here, This was actually discovered because this, I think it was this print came up in the Met, and this print came up in the Art Institute of Chicago. And they said they were by different artists, which is true. But again, if you look at it, it's actually a much more complicated story. They're by this, it's by one artist, but the artist names change. But again, this is the sort of thing that researchers, art historians love to dig into. This is the sort of stuff that they want to talk about and not massive digging through piles of stuff. This is something that would never, ever be possible to do normally. Because the thing is that the Metropolitan Museum of Art, for example, has like 4,000 prints. And the Art Institute of Chicago has thousands and thousands of prints. It's a needle in a haystack, going back and forth. You can't find all these combinations. So one of the big things that I really want to do is, again, fix all this information out there. So you end up with cases, going back to Japanese names, so there are actually many ways in which you can write a single artist's name. So you can, especially in English. I've found thousands of ways in which people mess up a Japanese name in English. So there are many ways, and all of these are referring to the same artist. I actually could have filled many pages of this, but I'll just leave it at that. Now what's also interesting, and well, that's good. Maybe we can just build up a mapping. Like if we know what the artist's name is in Japanese, we can figure out what it is in English as a result. But the problem is that the mapping isn't very good. So you have a particular, in this case, a piece of kanji, which reads ando. And what happens, though, is that you can actually be read in many different ways. All four of these here are completely valid alternate pronunciations for that one piece of kanji. Where you're like, OK, so I can't just do a mapping now. I can't just translate it that way. Like, OK, but if I have the English, I can then map it back to the Japanese. However, that doesn't work either. So what you end up here is really a many-to-many mapping. Every kanji can point to multiple English. Every English can point to multiple kanji. It's a complete mess. These are the sort of problems where, because approaching, I like to approach, I guess, learning another language as a programmer, and I like it to be nice and clean, and like have these clear delineations. And this is definitely not the case here. So I've written a whole bunch of Node modules to fix this for myself. Because again, like all these sort of inconsistencies really, really bother me. So I'm going to talk about these four here really quickly. So this one already existed called Hepburn. So there's a form of what's called, it's for romanization. So taking a Japanese phrase and turning it into the English equivalent. So you can do these mappings back and forth. So you're going to have like the English and then the phonetic Japanese. Japanese also has multiple alphabets, and that's a whole other mess unto itself. So another one I wrote was this module called enamdict. And there's actually this really cool database out there of Japanese names. So the mapping between the Japanese name written in Japanese and the English version of it. So you can actually go through and be like, OK, is this artist's name in there? Can I use that? And then using that combined with this, another module called, and this is porting from the National Diet Library, Name Authority. So the National Diet Library is sort of the Japanese Library of Congress. And this is their database of all the Japanese names that they know of, I guess. But what happens is that when you combine all these together into a single module, which I called Romaji Name, is you can do this. So you can get a name that looks like this at the top, Sharaku Toshusai. And you can take that and deconstruct it. So a couple things that were wrong here. For one, the names were written in the wrong order. Typically, for older Japanese names, you would write it what we commonly think of as family name first and then given name second, as opposed to the westernized given name, then family name. So this institution, this Western institution, wrote it backwards. Two, they actually wrote it completely wrong. Like there's supposed to be these stress marks here, which actually means they're long vowels, and those. Again, like UTF-8 and Unicode's really hard, but they just like punted on it. They're like, whatever, just like it's like O something. It's just an O now. And so, but obviously that's wrong. So that really bothers me. And then also, figuring out, so part of this is figuring out which part of that name is the given name versus the surname, and that's a really challenging thing. And then also splitting the kanji. So there's this whole module that takes care of all of this now. You can put in a Japanese name and get it out in this beautiful format that you can use wherever you want. In my case, on my website. I also wrote a similar module for parsing dates. So in this case, you throw it any sort of like museum-esque date where they're like, oh, 1820s or 18th and 19th century. And it'll take that sort of fuzzy date and turn it into a very specific, oh, that means 1810 to 1819. And because again, I like being able to have those very specific numbers, because then I can pop it into like an Elasticsearch database and I can do nice queries against it. You can't do nice queries against Meiji era. Like that means nothing to a database. So going back really quickly, just about these prints up at the beginning from a lot in auction. So again, like you can, in this case, I took the picture of them. I got a picture for the prints. I put it into my website, and it came up with a couple matches. So what ends up happening is that I came up with an artist name, fantastic. I found out when it was printed, 1897. That's awesome. This is what is that, 117-year-old collection of prints. The prints sold for $550. And again, that's really cheap for, was it 20-some odd prints. And individually, each of those prints, I found out, would sell for $100 to $400 individually. Now again, that's because the auction house didn't know what they had. They're just like, just put it up. So that means the true estimate is $2,100 to $8,400. I should say that I did get these prints. Now I throw the asterisk there because I say the true estimate is $2,100 to $8,400. However, you have to find someone who's willing to buy them at that price, obviously. And then at that point, you're essentially becoming a woodblock dealer, and that's like a whole thing unto itself. So we'll see if I end up going down that road. Regardless, I think there's some beautiful prints, and I like being able to own them. So one thing I want to touch on really, really briefly here at the end is I've been using this for Japanese art, but I've been really interested in ways in which this technology can be used for other forms of art. And I've been doing some analysis recently with the Frick Art Reference Library here in New York. They're an institution that goes together with the Frick collection. The Frick collection was made by this robber baron in the early 1900s. Beautiful art, you should go check it out. And his daughter built this art reference library. It's one of the best resources in the world for researching art of all forms. And they had this collection, they had this database of anonymous Italian art. So this is all art that was Renaissance era, but they didn't have any names for it. They didn't know who made what. So I decided to do some analysis across it using the image analysis, and you end up discovering really interesting things. So in cases like this, so both of these artworks, they're photographs, they're physical photographs, and they had been filed in different folders. So that this is, and again, like a real physical archive. So someone had looked at one and been like, oh, that looks, this particular, this particular century, this particular style, and put it in one folder. Another person went like, oh no, that belongs over here. So these are two different photographs of obviously the same work of art, but living in two completely different places. But the thing is that once you start doing image analysis across it, you can be like, well, obviously these two are the same. We can do the matching to confirm that. And now we can start to correct the information in the archive. So I did this, and I ended up finding a whole bunch of stuff and starting doing these corrections, even cases where the lighting is different. And cases like this, where you have one portion of an image inside another image, or different, one that's in black and white versus color, or again, a smaller fragment that's part of a much larger, in this case, mural. And then you start getting really interesting stuff. So you start getting the cases before and after conservation. So this is the case where a photo of this artwork had been done early on, and then a different photo had been taken much later. Things have been fixed. You can see some chipped paint that had been repaired. And you see even more dramatic versions of this. So I'm not sure if this is before and after conservation or if it's before and after destruction. It could be, but again, this is the sort of thing that an art researcher can now look into and be like, hey, art researcher, this is interesting. These two look very, very similar to each other. They're probably the same artwork. Why are these looks so different? But the thing is, they can start to figure that out. And you start getting into really interesting things like copies. So these are two artworks. They look very, very similar, but they're actually completely different pieces of art. And if you start to dig into it, you learn that these are two copies of a Da Vinci work. So they weren't copies of each other, they're a copy of a third work. And you end up with versions like this, where you have, I love like all these like the frolicking babies and stuff like that. And again, these look very, very similar. They're obviously influenced. There's an influence happening, but it's a different work. And one of the things I've been exploring most recently is using this data to start to do some really interesting graph analysis. So there's this really cool framework called Neo4j. It's a weird name, but it's a graph database. It's different from like a relational database or a NoSQL. It allows you to analyze the connections between things. So one of the things I was able to do was start to look at what happens if you have one collection of art, in this case the collection from the Frick of anonymous Italian art, and another collection from another institution. In this case, we got a collection of 15th century Italian art from the Zeri Foundation in Italy. So what happens if you take these two collections and start to merge them together? What happens as a result? So one of the things that's been happening, I say this in the past tense, this is like last Saturday I was doing this, where you end up with a case, so here's an image at the Frick, another image at the Frick. They both, the image similarity was able to say this image is similar to this image at the Zeri, and that one's image is similar to that image at Zeri. However, there was no similarity between the two of them. And that's really interesting, because now if you dig into the actual images, you can see that they're both fragments of the same fresco. And so the image similarity wouldn't have worked there. They couldn't match each other because there wasn't anything overlapping. However, they both matched this third image at this other institution. So this is a really cool problem that I like, because this is what happens when institutions start to digitize and start to use their data in a very efficient manner and start to merge and work together, do this collaboration. So this is something I've been very excited about helping. And you end up with really cool cases like this. So this is a case where this image of the Frick is similar to the image of the Zeri. That one's similar to that one, the Frick and the Zeri, but none of them are similar to each other. You have this circular graph. And if you dig into the images, you find out why is because they each have different images, and the ones at the Zeri, they have them organized slightly differently. So you end up having these matches as a result. So this is, again, this is really, I think, really, really interesting, because it never would have been found out that this artwork was the same as that one, and that one was the same as that one, but you can solve all that instantaneously by collaborating. Okay, so that is, and one thing I want to close out with is just talking a little bit about, so this is my spare time project. This is my fun side project. And I've been working on this now for a while. And one of the things I've done recently is made sort of a change in my schedule. So last November, I started working on this every single day. Because before this, I would work on these projects sort of haphazardly. I would be like, oh, I have some time this weekend. I'm really going to work on it this Saturday, and just like buckle down, just get some coding in. But the thing is, like what if Saturday comes and it's really beautiful out, and I want to go out and do awesome things, and go to a museum, and all this stuff. I don't want to have to put my life on hold just because I want to do some coding. And again, it's like doing that balance. So one of the things I started to do is I started to force myself to code something meaningful every single day, no matter what. And it had to be code. It had to go up onto GitHub, and it had to be open source. And so I've done that now for 122, 123 days. And it's completely changed how I do development. It's interesting because it used to be that, again, like I would feel a lot of this stress where I'd be like, I wouldn't work on my side project all week, and I really wanted to. And then the weekend would come, and I'd feel this overwhelming stress, just being like, I have to work on this now. If I don't work on it, I won't get the chance to work on it again for another week. And the problem also becomes where if I don't work on it consistently, I forget what I was working on. I can leave notes for myself and remember where I left off, but even with all the notes, you still lose that context where you're like, it helps if you're still thinking about the problem. So what's happened is that even I'm doing less coding per day now, maybe only coding 30 minutes to an hour. But it's helped me to set my expectations and be able to work more consistently and also sort of keep this in the back of my mind all the time. So then that way, because it used to be like if I worked on it like every week or every other week, I would forget and not be thinking about it. But now if I have like some downtime, I'm like walking to the train or doing some other thing, I'm like thinking about it, like, oh, if I solve that problem later, I can do this thing and fix that. And then when that in the evening, I just be like, all right, 30 minutes, let's do this, code some code, and I feel great. Like all that burden is completely lifted now. So I just want to close out with that. And so there's the website, the ukiyo.org. All the code is up on GitHub. And I've been publishing papers as well about the research I've been doing. So if you're interested in reading some more long-form papers, I've been publishing them up on my website as well. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have time for some questions. Let me come to you with the microphone.
Hey, John, I just wanted to ask, have you ever had any censorship issues with like the Japanese government or related organizations with like publicizing these prints or whatnot?
So meaning that like I've been pulling in the images and they've been like, don't pull in our images? No, actually, it's been interesting. So like, I didn't ask for permission to get the images before I got the images. And it's interesting because like really this project that I'm doing I think really could have only been done by an individual like myself. Because most institutions, before they even start this project, they would start the, I would assume, multi-year process of asking for permission from every other institution and going through the legal departments to be like, is this okay? And blah, blah, blah. What are the ramifications? Blah, blah. And it never would have happened. And in my case, I just started scraping all the websites and putting all the images online. And I would much rather, ask for forgiveness than ask for permission. I think that's the phrase. And it's worked out really well so far. So like, it's interesting. I've heard from a lot of these, a lot of the museums and stuff, and they're like, "Thank you so much for doing this. This has been very, very helpful for our collection." And one of the things that's happened that I was not expecting is that many museums have been coming to me, being like, "Can we be included? How do we get in the website?" And it's like, well, yeah, it's like hard to explain. Like, I have to write a scraper and then do this stuff. But it's also hard to explain to like if you're talking to a curator, who's like really nice, and be like and trying to explain that like their website's kind of broken and not very good, because they have no control over that stuff. So like, but yeah, so that at least so far I haven't had any issues, which has been awesome.
Hi, I have two questions. So my first question is, what are your future plans with regards to this project? And then the second question is whether or not you've considered doing analysis in between the particular prints of specific artists, and in terms of their color, maybe their structure, edges, and such.
Okay, so the future of this project, one of the big things is I want to make it much more wiki-like, for lack of a better term. Because right now, all the information is just there. I'm like, oh, I pulled this from this museum. It's right here. But the thing is that there are frequently many, many mistakes. It happens. And people will have that knowledge and can go in and fix the issues. That's one of the big things I want to work on. Analysis in between artists and styles. I've definitely thought about doing that, especially doing color analysis. There are certain pigments that were only used during certain time periods. And I would love to be able to look at that. One of the problems is that there's really no guarantee that the images are properly lit and color corrected. And there's also no guarantee that the prints aren't themselves faded, which they frequently are. So it's not impossible. I've definitely thought about it. The stylistic stuff is much, much trickier than color. I haven't thought of a good way to do that yet. But yeah, that's something I'm definitely thinking about.
Additional 2 questions. Did you look into some programmatic way to figure out the color bar problem? Because it seems like there's some way to figure that out.
Yeah, so at first I'm like, oh, great, they're always on the left and the right. I can just chop up 100 pixels and 100 pixels. No. They're very rarely consistent. So one of the things, what's interesting is that they seem to change the style of the color bars, not only the position of them, but also the physical style of the color bar on like a photographing session by photographing session. Because frequently they'll just take photographs and then like months will go by and someone else is doing it and it's at a different place. And like, yeah, and I was like, I tried every conceivable way of removing them automatically, not to mention trying to train my own computer vision thing to detect them to remove them. But what's actually happening as a result is now that I've cropped a whole bunch of them, I have a whole bunch of nice, cleanly cropped color bar images now. So I can use those color bar images to train a computer vision thing to detect color bars better. But that's another project for another day. You had another question?
Yeah, have you talked about removing the scraping portion, like maybe integrating with Google Image Search or something, because they've sort of solved the scraping problem. So like maybe talking to them about hooking into, because they're extracting all these images for you already, so. Okay,
so the issue is that I'm not only extracting the images, I'm also extracting the data from the pages. And that's almost always the harder problem. And additionally, the Google Images does not pull in images from many of the databases I want to pull from. Because the problem is that they're behind, a post request. So it doesn't scrape through, it doesn't submit a form and then it starts scraping through the individual pages, which my thing does. So I'm actually, what is this, the deep web or the dark web or whatever the term is. Like, this is that, but for the museum dark web. So, yeah, the less creepy version. So that's part of the issue. I mean, as I say, as a result, Google Image Search is scraping me now, and all the images are coming online. So it's by reverse. Yeah.
Hey, you're coming up with a bunch of different versions of the same image, like some are black and white, some are color. Have you thought of trying to create like the canonical original image, right? So like some might be more faded than others, but some might have better details than others, and sort of combine them into what it should have been originally?
Mm-hmm. So as it turns out, that's a really, really hard problem. And it's the sort of thing I don't think that computer vision can solve. Because the problem is, to someone who's trained, you can look at a bunch of prints and be like, that's a reproduction, that's a reproduction, that's a reproduction. And then be like, oh, and then you have to dig in to be like, oh, this is an early state versus a later state. And the thing is, just because it's an early state doesn't mean the colors are good versus, and just because it's later doesn't. I mean, the thing is like, I don't think it would be possible to arrive at sort of that, happy medium, unfortunately. It's too finicky a problem. But the thing, one way around that would be to make it easy for experts to be able to go in and be like, this is an early edition. You can tell by the way such and such looks that it's early. And this is a later one, but the colors are better, and et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, that's really where experts have to come in, I feel. Yeah.
Hi. Do you know what we do with jQuery? We sell ads.
Sorry, say again?
We sell ads.
Do I sell ads on this?
No. We sell ads with jQuery. So you're making me feel really, really bad.
Oh.
That's it.
Okay. No, it's okay.
I had a question about the computer vision part.
Yeah.
How did you write anything to find duplicates or parts of the triptychs, or was that the service provided from Match Engine.
Yeah, Match Engine. So yeah, that kind of came as part of it, simply because it's able to look for portions of an image and when portions of an image overlap. So that works really well. So one of the gotchas though is that when you upload the image to Match Engine, it has to typically you have to resize it down, and as a result you lose some detail. So there are cases where if you have not just a 3-panel print, but like an 8-panel one, which do exist, there's a chance that it may not match individual portions of that. So yeah, but that's not something I had to write in particular. Yeah. Oh, one other thing I just mentioned, I'll be happy to answer more questions. I also brought some woodblock prints with me that I own. So if you, I'll probably set up on the table over there. While you come answer questions, I'll show some woodblock prints as well, just to show. So it'll be fun.
Seems like a good comment to close on. So thank you, John Resig.
Thank you.
And thank you all for coming. You're welcome to stay for a while. We won't kick you out right away, but yeah, hang out. John can stay for a little bit. And yeah, and join us at the next Code is Craft next month. We'll have Giovanni Kincaid from Etsy talking about how we do product design, data-driven product design. So yeah, thank you all.